Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Reading Party podcast with Megan and Lexie. This episode continues our season looking at stories set in the Roman Empire and its periphery. Some of the material includes themes of violence or sexual assault. It is not suitable for under 18s. We hope you have your favourite beverage and snacks ready to go, because we've got our teas and are ready to start spilling the tea on our latest ancient story. Hello everyone, welcome back to Reading Party Podcast. For those who are new to the show, I'm Megan. I have the lovely Lexi joining me because she's amazing and we do this together. And we're talking about Rome, all of the Rome stuff this season. And today is the novel Eagle of the Ninth by Rosemary Sutcliff, which I think came out in 1954. And yeah, Lexi, before the book, what are you drinking?
I have just normal green tea for those
Perfect.
healthy antioxidants. Are you drinking anything?
I just finished a cup of black English breakfast.
Classic.
Yes, it's very tasty. I enjoy it.
Nice. Tea is delicious. I'm quite sore after cleaning our office spaces, so this is making me feel better. But also, it's great because there's a ton of tea to be spilled on this book, which
Oh my word.
I didn't know anything. I mean, we watched the movie, we talked to Lindsay, but also I was just like unaware. Also, she said it was a children's book, which you could tell it is. So my mind went places. But before we get into that, do you want to recap the book?
Yes. So we did, like Lexi said, we've already talked about the movie, which is just called The Eagle with Channing Tatum. Good movie. I think we both enjoyed it. The book generally follows the same plot. We have the lovely Marcus, who is a Roman soldier, comes to Britain as a legionary centurion. I don't remember his actual rank, but he comes over as a commanding officer, takes control, does great things. Everyone loves him. Then they get attacked by like the British broadly. A specific tribe is like, we don't want you, go away. And he gets quite badly injured. His leg is bad enough that he's discharged from the army. He goes to live with his uncle, who is also a previous soldier, lives in Britain still. And the rest of the story really follows Marcus as he recovers from his injury, meets, oh my God, what's his name?
Eska,
there we go. Thank you. I drilled it into my head before we got on the call today, and then it just kind of fell out. So he meets Eska, who is initially his slave and becomes his friend, and their journey through like the wilds of Britain and northern Scotland to retrieve the Eagle standard, which had been Marcus' father's. And Marcus' father was the commander of the 9th Legion. They went out into, again, the north of Britain and are never heard from again. And the loss of the Eagle is a massive blow to like Marcus's family honor, but also the honor of the Legion. So they hear a rumor that the Eagle is out there somewhere. So they go and find it and essentially bring it back. And right at the end, Marcus kind of becomes engaged to his next door neighbor's daughter, who is an uncomfortable 13. But I will say the whole love romance plot is left out of the movie, rightfully so, because of the pedophilic discomfort that would not have been much of an issue in Roman times, or I suspect in 1954. But it's also a very minor part of the story of the book. I think it's very much not quite an afterthought, but it's an addition that is not central really to the plot. Main differences. We should talk about those. The main differences between the book and the movie. They include the wolf cub. There's a wolf cub in the book that does not make it into the movie. He is very cute. Obviously, the love angle is new. The way also that Marcus and Eska go on their travels is very different. In the movie, they kind of just go as like undercover traveler, like that they don't really have much of a backstory as to why they're roaming around Britain. In the book, Marcus is disguised as a Greek eye doctor and ocular, and he's the characterization is really really funny because he does this very grandiose over the top like self promotion thing when he comes across new people. I am what Demeter of no, not Demeter, someone of Alexander, I can't remember. And I'm the greatest eye doctor in the world. Is there anyone in your village with eye sickness? I can cure them. And it's very amusing. And he kind of makes his way around all the little villages. And then when he finally comes to the seal people, and we see them in the movie because they are the people with the eagle standard, he's not understood to be Esker's slave. In the movie, they kind of flip the roles. Esker is the son of he's a prince, really, a British prince, a son of a tribal chieftain, but Marcus is slave. And in the movie, they flip it so that Marcus becomes Esker's slave while they're staying with the seal peoples, which is, I thought, was a really interesting decision. I didn't realize it wasn't native to the book, but in the book, they're both represented as free people, and Esker is actually freed before they go on their journey, and Marcus is taken in to the tribe to cure the chief's son. He has an eye issue, and Esker is just seen as his man at arms. He's like his guard type thing, guard and
Yeah.
assistant.
Garden assistant, I think, is closest.
And I assume that they do that role reversal in the movie. They make Marcus a slave to try and give him some character development and some growth and some understanding of actually what slavery entails, and how slaves are treated, because I suspect that's probably something that free Romans didn't think about an awful lot. But it wasn't, I don't think it was needed in the book because Marcus and Esker, by the time they even leave his uncle's home, are treating each other and represented as equals already. So I don't think that switch was needed. We also, there's a kind of lost legionary, a soldier of the Ninth who goes native. And in the movie, does he attack? I think he attacks Marcus and Esker as they're riding through a forest. In the book, that's played out slightly differently. Marcus and Esker find him, they make camp for a night, and they hear someone singing in Latin. I really enjoyed this bit. They hear someone singing in Latin, and they're like, what is going on? So they kind of creep around to this campfire and find what looks to be a Pictish huntsman singing in perfect Latin. So there's a little bit of a dialogue between them, and then they end up going back to his house, and they see he's got this scar under his chin when he shaves, which Lindsay told us is actually not at all accurate, but it tells Marcus this man is a Roman soldier. So when they leave again, they kind of ask him who he is, what happened, and they find out he was a member of the Ninth Legion. So they get kind of the information about actually what happened to Marcus' father and to the rest of the legions. And then he turns back up later in the book when they're escaping with the eagle standard from the seal people. He guides them through a bog so they can escape and kind of try and get back to the wall and back to safety. I actually preferred how the book did that. I felt it gave a much more rounded character to the huntsman, and it was just more interesting than having more people attacking him. So what were your thoughts, Lexi?
I had a lot, actually. Like, I really didn't think that I was going to have as many as I did, only because, I felt pretty comfortable with the story that, the movie came out in 2011, and I've had multiple years of being able to watch it and come back to it because it is one of my favorite films. So, I do, but, yeah, okay. So I want to kind of start with, I'm going to try to walk through it sequentially. I sort of have my little notes in front of me, but I know I'm going to veer off script. But um I want to start with just the way that the book is written. Um and it kind of, I noticed it probably because Lindsay said something. She made a comment. I don't remember exactly how she made, but the comment she made about Rosemary Sutcliff, when she was writing this, she couldn't travel because she was bound to her wheelchair. And So I as I was listening through the audiobook, I got this really interesting sense, and I'm curious if you did too, that the way Sutcliffe writes is she really gives a lot of airtime and a lot of life to describing like physical sensations in this book. Um, and what I mean is kind of um there's like the section at the beginning when Marcus gets injured, the physical pain of like the attack, and talking about the um like the incapacitation that he kind of feels at certain times when it's like body's throbbing or whatever. I thought that was really interesting because it no doubt was completely influenced by the fact that Sutcliffe herself was like disease. She had, I think it was, I think Lindsay said it was like a rare form of arthritis or something. And so that's why she was confined to a wheelchair for most of her life. And she couldn't travel to Hadrian's Wall. And so a lot of what she did was research in her own imagination. And only through the book could I actually get a sense of like, oh, oh, she really knows what she's talking about. And she's telling us via her characters. So I thought that was really, really interesting. So I really liked that change. Also just because it's written beautifully, I've gotta say. Um, so that was my first thing. There's just a lot of like just the way it's written talks a lot about physical sensations, which I thought was cool. And then I would say again, yeah, it plays out similar to the movie. Although it's interesting because I feel like the movie also went out of its way to sort of give people names. I mean, like, it's a movie, it also had to move a little faster. I mean, the book isn't long, it's short. I think I saw somewhere it's like 255 pages or something.
Yeah, it's not a long read.
And the audiobook version I had was like 4 hours and something minutes. So it was just short, but it was interesting because like the part where like he gets injured by the roaming droids or like druids or whatever, they which happened in the film. It's interesting because you know in the movie they kind of shove it forward where you just get this sort of weird impressionistic like dream-like thing, and then he awakes and then he's like, "Oh, where am I?" And they're like, "I'm your uncle on your father's side, and you were transported out of wherever you were. Now you're here." And here it moves slower because he wakes up and he's still kind of at the garrison where he's the centurion. And they're saying, okay, well, you have to, they give him all this time to like recover from his wound before they say, well, we're going to, sorry, kick you out of the Legion. Thanks for your service, honorable discharge, blah, blah, blah. The way he meets Eska is described quite interestingly. I mean, in the film, we see he's just like suddenly out with his uncle in this like mini gladiatorial arena, I guess. And then you see Eska come in, and then he's described as just not like he doesn't fight. He just kind of throws his sword down, and he's about to be killed when he's like, okay, let's save him. So that was a bit of an interesting change. Um,
And in the movie as well, his uncle is the person who buys Eska as like a companion for Marcus. And in the book, Marcus buys him himself because he needs a slave. Essentially, he's like, I can't keep mooching off my uncle's body slave. So that was
yeah,
interesting.
that
And
was
I do wonder if that's something to do with how they wanted to try and separate Marcus in terms of the morality of slave ownership. Um, he's kind of
mm,
portrayed as being like set apart. He treats his slave very well. He clearly doesn't see him as anything lesser, and he didn't purchase him. Um,
mhm.
so I don't know if there was anything to do with that. I also thought the characterization of Eska was very different in the
Completely.
movie and the book.
Completely. I mean, all the relationships are actually quite different as well. I mean, if you I mean, you look at kind of like the four major people players, whatever, you right, you have Eska, and then you have Cub. I can't believe it. this is a shit. Like you have a wolf cub and you just name him Cub. I was so disappointed. I had many thoughts on that. I was just like, why? You could literally have named him anything. But yeah, so Cub, they kind of, it was interesting. They wanted this dynamic of like Cub was plucked from death after the death of his mother. He didn't like Eska didn't want him to be killed by hunters, so he just took him. And then of course you have the 13-year-old Katya. I think that's her name, Katya. That's what it sounded like, at least.
Yeah, I
I
think
didn't
so.
see it written down. Okay, so I think it was Katya, and then she had this interesting description of like she's a Briton as well, but she has this comical sort of over the top adoption of Roman customs thanks to her aunt and uncle, I think it was. And like so she goes on this kind of diatribe about how like identity is such a big part of this book in a way that doesn't come through, especially in the film, because the film is more like I'm a Roman, and if you're not Roman, you're the other, and all we care about is Rome. So the film just kind of is a bit more black and white. I feel like this plays around with because it's like with Katya, at least the insert that I felt it presented was like, okay, so what does it mean to be Britain? What is a Briton? What does it mean to be a Roman? What does it mean to be a Roman Briton hybrid? What does it mean to be a slave? What does it mean to be free? What does it mean to be orphaned? Like, and then Marcus himself here, it's not made clear in the movie, but they were like he comes from he's Etruscan or whatever. They're like he's not even native to Britain, which they definitely don't tell us in the film. Like they start us off just being like, and he is the son of the commander of the Ninth Legion who went missing, and I need to win back my family's honor, and that's why when they asked me where I wanted to be posted, I said Britain. And so you're like, oh, okay, so that leads me to believe that they're Romans in Britain. And then you're like, LOL, what? He talks about just like missing like his Etruscan home. So you're like, okay, cool. That was interesting. I will say though, the thing that I want to really draw attention to is something that I think I brought up. It was one of the last questions I asked Lindsay about the film, which was like this characterization of they clearly wanted the film to feel like a buddy adventure thing, but what starts off is kind of like this sort of slave master, not quite antagonistic, but clearly subservient role to where they have to learn to trust each other as they're wandering around the wilds, to the point where eventually Eska, like when they get captured by the seal people, and then he has to have this whole deception of, oh yes, now he's my slave, and now I need to just like prove that I'm loyal in this ruse to get the eagle. And then like through their journey you see, and then the movie ends with a nice pretty bow where they're like, and now I will free him because we have become friends. um the it's really interesting to me that because Rosemary Sutcliff set this like friend dynamic where Marcus does not feel Eska truly is like a slave. And he's like, no, you're like my equal. Why have I've never given you cause to believe anything different. I mean, yes, legally, until he frees him, he is like a slave. But I just thought it was interesting because like you could tell she was really focused on relationships in the novel, but then it's like it's a bit well, to me it was a bit troubling to see how it was treated so differently from the movie, just because like things don't make sense on a level of like Eska's entire family was wiped out by Marcus's fellow Roman soldiers. And so the movie portrays like this rightful anger, where especially that scene where he tells the story of like, yes, my father and brothers rebelled and then they were killed and slaughtered, and so then I was forced to see my father cut my mother's throat right in front of me. And like in the book, I feel like Eska's a bit too unquestioning in his loyalty to Marcus, like right off the bat. So that didn't really track to me. And I was like, if all Marcus did to set up this relationship was like save him from death in the gladiatorial arena, I'm like, to me, that does not equal immediate, unquestioning loyalty of any kind. Like there was not, to me, enough buildup. So actually, that was a change that I didn't love, and I think the film handled because it was kind of like a slower burn before you really see the friendship develop, which I like, the sort of antagonistic to what do you need to go through to like make two people who are very different bond. And also like it's the same thing with like it came back to that theme when like that scene where Cub is like offered his freedom, but then he's like no, so he comes trotting home, and then he's going to like humbly sort of go up to his master and nuzzle him and be like, no, I don't want to be free. um and like it's paralleled when Marcus finally offers Eska the manumission papers. He's just like, it's like a parallel to like, okay, so sort of savage cub slave man, you are free. And then he's just like, nope, I'm gonna declare my unwavering loyalty and devotion to you, Marcus, still after all of this. So I think, to me, that the biggest lesson I took from that is like Rosemary Sutcliff, and it's, maybe makes sense writing it in 1954, but I feel like her message here is that friendship will trump sort of tribal affiliation, tribal enmity. And like, she's writing about Roman Britain, and when you think about just like World War II had already happened. Like we had a half century of like post-colonial bloodshed and terrible tribalism, and we had the Nazis. And so I'm like, so you're going to write a novel set in the ancient world where tribalism was still a big thing, and then talk about how no, but love and friendship, peace, peace, kiss, kiss is gonna like suddenly make it all better. So that was, I think, the biggest change between the book and the movie that I didn't love, because I did love the turn of like the build of the feelings of brotherhood in the film, and it took longer. Yeah, this was just way too unbelievable. I was like, absolutely not. Like, you'd be so angry if your family was slaughtered by Romans, and here you are like, this is my bro. Absolutely not. I'm sorry, I just found that to be kind of crazy. But in the context of the book she was trying to create, I also understand that Rosemary Sutcliff wanted to write a very touching, kid-friendly story about like the meaning of true friendship and loyalty and the love of comradeship. And um yeah, but in the context of the Roman Empire, I was like, that doesn't track. To, I don't know. Did you have issues with that, or not as much as I did?
Um, I didn't have issues with it, mainly because I was like reading it as a kid's book. I think if it was in an adult oriented novel, it would have been frustrating because you don't see any of that relational development between Eska and Marcus. He buys him, and there's a bit of description about how their lives are together, and then suddenly it's like they're bestest buds. And there's kind of hints that they're just similar personalities and they're just very comfortable together. And like sometimes you just are with someone. But I think you're right. I think there would have been a lot more enmity on Eska's part. And there are little hints of this is probably more complicated than is being represented when they come back from their grand adventure to recover the eagle. Eska, that they're going to go to Uncle Aquila's study to talk about what happened, and Eska's like, no, you go with your uncle. I'm not going to do that. And Marcus essentially says, well, why? You were part of this. I need you to come and help me. And he said, well, this is a house that I was a slave in, and it's clear that there is some residual resentment, weird feeling, discomfort for Eska. And Marcus kind of says, look, are you going to, essentially, are you going to dwell on this forever? Are you always going to feel like resentful about having been made a slave? And I'm like, I mean, I think that would be reasonable. I would feel resentful of being enslaved for a while. Sure, why not? Why shouldn't he feel resentful? But Eska's like, oh no, and they go upstairs together. So there are little hints of it. It's not anywhere near as developed as in the movie. And like you, that's one of the things I really did appreciate about the film. You don't have this very quick shift from master slave to best friend forever. And it makes a lot more sense to have Esker manumitted at the end of the movie, because it allows you to see the development of that relationship. Because if they'd manumitted him at the beginning of the movie, he wouldn't have gone. He'd have gone home or gone to find whoever he could, who he was related to. In the movie, in the book, he's manumitted before they leave and given the choice of whether to go with him. And Asker's like, of course I'm going with you. And he even gets like mildly offended that Marcus would suggest that he wouldn't. Like, are you trying to get rid of me? And Marcus says, no, I'd love for you to come. You don't have to if you don't want to. It's like they're dating.
They were
So
roommates.
they were roommates. They adopted a dog together. So yes, I think the movie did a much better job of exploring that relationship. And like, I think there is a lot to be said for the fact that the movie is clearly aimed at an adult audience and the book is very obviously not. I think it gives more room for that kind of exploration. I do think the book could have done a bit more, but it's not something that was blindingly obvious to me as I was reading through it, I don't think.
I mean, I think if I'd read it as a kid's book, I probably would have let more go. But because in the back of my mind, I was comparing it to clearly a more adult film, it was more on my mind to take a much more critical look, which is probably why I was like ripping it to shreds in certain places, being like, what? Absolutely not. Why? But yeah, so just because like in light of kind of the way that she was telling the story right after I finished the audiobook, I tried to find like old interviews with Rosemary Sutcliff to see if she said anything about her book that she wrote. And I did actually find she did an interview, and she was quoted saying, I think I am happiest of all in Roman Britain. I feel very much at home there. If I could do a time flip and landed back in Roman Britain, I would take a deep breath, take perhaps a fortnight to get used to things, then be all right. For I would know what was making people around me tick. But if I landed in 13th or 14th century England, I'd be lost. I have a special, here I am again. I know exactly what they're going to have for breakfast feeling when I get back into Roman Britain, which is very nice. Now, I don't know this woman, but I'm just like, look, as a historian, can I be like, oh, yes, I would like to time travel back and then I would be perfectly fine. Other than just the
I
blatantly
just need
obvious,
5 minutes to reorient myself.
yeah, like it just other than the to me at least, the blatantly obvious, like I think at this point, all of us who are historians are like, I freely admit, time travel would be interesting, but I'd want to go back only in a hamster ball if I was not going to be enslaved, a woman, any of these categories that's not like a man and native to whatever culture you're going to. Like it just struck me as a funny quote because I was like, that is not my sentiment. I think you would find it hard. We don't know what makes them tick. We're still studying that today, so I think it's bold to assume that. But you know what? She was an author, and in the context of like making clearly a kid's book, even though she did research for it, but again, she hadn't gone to these places. I don't know. I just thought it was like interesting, but it tracks that I was like, yep, this is like the opinion one would have if you're trying to create a love, peace, friendship, and loyalty kids book about Roman Britain. So again, you know, Rosemary Sutcliff sadly is not here for me to ask questions, but just from that snippet I found from an old interview, I was kind of like, okay, well, that's why this book probably doesn't have the level of nuance I'm looking for. Because if she took such a kind of simplistic view of the past, I was like, okay, well, okay, sure, why not? So, you know, there was that. I mean, and again, you know, I don't want to harp on it too long, but yeah, the weird romance with Katya, she was 13. My initial thoughts were just, ew. Like, I don't want to hear this described. Ew. I feel like a pedophile. I mean, I'm sure maybe Rosemary Sutcliff thought it was like sweet, but I'm also like, what in what world? I mean, okay, to be fair though, I was like, I don't think she actually told us how old Marcus was. So I'm kind of like, is this like a
But
15 year
considerably
old?
older than 13, though, if he's been in the military for long enough to get a command.
Right. So that's why I was like, there's a difference between being 15 looking at a 13-year-old like, okay, I guess. But then if you're like 25 looking at 13, you're like, ew. So I, and then again, like her Rosemary Sutcliff's whole thing about like love, love, peace, peace, especially like toward the end where he comes back and Katya's all like mad. She's like, you told me you'd be home earlier and you didn't, and I was waiting, and now I'm mad. So don't you dare like go somewhere now that you have, means, and don't take me with you. I'm like, grooming. So groomed. She's clearly uh where's the free will. And actually it was very funny. Maybe it's because I was just rewatching the series the other day, but this whole like she's 13 and he's older thing um totally brought back memories of like the time traveler's wife, and I was like, oh
Oh my
my
gosh, I
god.
haven't seen that film, but I read the book and it was, I loved it and I hated it. It's a beautifully written book. The premise is fascinating. It's a great story, but um,
Yeah, I
there,
mean,
yeah, no.
yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I think it's interesting. All the reviews online and stuff. It's like book readers are always like, it's a best-selling, well-loved novel. But when people are like, how does it translate to screen? Well, we have two adaptations. We have like the 2000, I think 4 or 5 or 6 film with um oh god, it's Eric Bana and Rachel McAdams. So it's a full-length film. It's creepy, but like it's sweet but kind of creepy. So that was one, and then they tried to reinvent it in 2022 as an HBO series. So we got the first season. It's 6 episodes, and it was sad because actually a great cast. It was Theo James and what's her name, Rose Leslie, um so Kit Harington's wife. So um Egret from Game of Thrones. So I was like so excited. Their chemistry was great. I loved the more imaginative take. They sort of tried to update the language a bit to like poke fun at how kind of creepy it was. But like it got canceled after that one season because people were like, this is gross. It's weird. Like he's a 41-year-old man coming to her when she's 18. They're like, he was a 32-year-old man when she was 6. They brought that up and they were like, grooming. So I just got very heavy, like time traveler's wife vibes the whole time. I was like, I'm sorry. I'm like, this girl is 13. She doesn't know what's good. Severe creep factor.
And like for Roman women, like marrying a nice guy that is probably a great thing to hope for, but also writing that into modern books is uncomfortable.
I mean, I could sort of see from my historian lens where she's coming from, because it's true. Women as young as 13, especially if you had your period by then, if you were early, you would be married off in the ancient world. Like you would be married at 13. Like not necessarily always, but definitely there were girls very young who were married, and there were women betrothed at like 2 years old, let's be real. But like to put that ancient concept in a children's book where you can't go into like nuanced detail and explain that this was like a serious thing that happened, that's, you know, by all intents and purposes in the modern world gross and inappropriate, like there's not room in a children's book. And so I'm kind of like, if it were written for adults where you could sort of explain and put nuance and try to actually show what it was like, I'm like, I'd still probably be uncomfy, but like I would understand it. But there's just no reason to do that in a children's book. I mean, why?
Yeah, and it didn't add an awful lot to the plot. I,
Nothing.
I think you could have very easily have removed her as a character, and really the book wouldn't have lost a lot. There would be fewer female characters, which is always a challenge with these kinds of things. but like the or even just have her in and have him be like an uncle, a fond uncle or something similar. You'd still get, because she's a fun character. I enjoyed her, but you don't like it wasn't necessary in my mind for either of their characters for it to end up being a romance thing. Like, have Marcus and Eska go and live on the land that Marcus is awarded somewhere and like do whatever it is they're going to do.
Yeah, so that was just unnecessary. I mean, it's only 255 pages, and I'm like, I'm sorry, you're gonna waste valuable time on this? Okay, yeah. So that was just, ugh. So I just went through those sections very quickly and was like, okay, now we forget about it. Um, yeah, let's see. Other notable differences, I guess, were the sort of end. Yeah, they bring the eagle back. I think in this one, in the book, it's much more like clearly the focus was Marcus's motivating goal the whole time is get the eagle and the honor back and reform the Ninth Legion and restore the family pride or whatever. In the film, it was like, yes, go get the eagle and restore it, but he didn't necessarily want to reform the Ninth. He was just like, I just want to redeem my father's honor and figure out what happened to him. And so they brought it back, and at the end of the movie, you have that one random comment where they're like, well, the Senate might want to reform the Ninth and award you the command. And I was like, well, but the book was like, but the Senate doesn't want to because they consider it a terrible loss. So no, you can't. I mean, and then of course they're like, well, maybe the Senate will reconsider, but it was just like really interesting how this one was very much like, no, 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 we don't want to do this. We don't want to do this. Um,
And also the fact that no one else in the book cared about the actual standard. They didn't
yeah,
give
like,
it back to Rome, and Marcus makes a comment while they're being chased out of tribal territory. If we're caught, I'm just going to throw the eagle off a cliff or into a river or something so that it can't be used against Rome as a weapon. And I'm like, what? You're going to throw it away. And he said better, like he makes the comparison, if he takes it back to Rome, it's going to be on a Roman scrap heap. So if it's on a Roman scrap heap, it may as well just be in a Caledonian lake somewhere. Like, why are we doing this? What's why? Yeah. No one gave a flying fuck about the eagle. And he takes it back and it ends up buried in his uncle's, or behind his uncle's altar. Um, hmm. That was confusing.
yeah. So I was just like, okay, sure. Yeah, I don't know. I'm like, I think the eagle in the book felt just very much more like the device to develop out the friendship and give them a motivation to have this buddy journey. Um, but it didn't really feel like, it's just weird to have a book called The Eagle of the Ninth and have this whole premise of like, this is so important and Rome's honor, and in these kinds of sword and sandals flicks, you're kind of expecting like, okay, I want to make it about the Roman Empire. I want to make it about X, Y, or Z, but like it just felt like a plot device, which was interesting, and it felt less so, at least in the film, because it felt like an actual big deal. um, but yeah, yeah.
Yep. It just,
Is
especially after having seen the film first, when actually the eagle is so important that Marcus will die to protect it, having him then say in the book, "Oh, I'll just throw it in a lake," was very jarring.
yeah, I was like, what? I Maybe I'm just reading way too much into it, and maybe my problem is like I should be reading it with the mind of a young child, because that's the thing. Like a lot of people who really love this book are people who are like, oh, I read it when I was a young child and I just absolutely fell in love with it. So maybe my problem is like I can't fully enjoy it because I'm thinking way too deeply with a critical analytical mind. Is that, I don't know.
I mean,
Like,
it's, yeah,
do you
it's very possible. It is very possible.
Because I'm like, do you
it
feel
was a
like you?
fun, it was a sweet book. Um, and as we say so often with a lot of this stuff, a product of its time, it's got some faults and some flaws, and some of the character developments are a little odd. Um, it was fun though.
Yeah, yeah. Uh,
You look very pained.
yeah, I like because I desperately want to like it, and I want to have like nice things, and like I just but it's just it's hard for me because like I don't have this nice sort of long history or memory of it, or these nostalgic memories. Because look, there's plenty of like problematic, shitty books that I read when I was a kid that I'm sure that I mean, even River God, for God's sake, I read that
Yeah.
in high school, and it's completely shitty now when you read it, and you're like, oh, this is so problematic. But I have great memories of it, and it will always be one of my favorite books. So maybe this is just a case of like I came to it as an adult with a very preformed mind and opinion about many things. And then of course I've had to compare it to a film that I've seen since 2011. So there could be a bit of that at work.
I do think that for a lot of people there is probably some rose-colored glasses going on, because there are, like you with River Gods, there are books that I read as a like teenager. For anyone who's read them, the Earth's Children series, I reread them as an adult a couple. I used like they were my all-time favorite books. I read them so many times, and I reread them a few years ago as a like not quite middle-aged, but as an adult. And oh my lord, there's some very the relationships in there are just very troubling, very troubling. And this is a book aimed at adults, um, but it's just stuff that I never picked up on as a teenager, because I mean, why would I? Um, and I suspect it might be similar for a lot of people who read Eagle of the Ninth as children, and just it has a special place in their hearts.
Yeah. I Okay, would you be likely to recommend this to kids?
Hmm. Yeah, I think so. I think the age difference between Katya and Marcus is not, it's not pronounced enough. It's not obvious enough that I think it would be a huge issue. It's probably something I would talk to my girls, actually, and my sons about after they had read the book, but it's not like I wouldn't be worried about them reading it in the first place. There's no like blood and gore. There's no sexuality or sexualization going on there. That I did actually really enjoy that, and I think for me that's what sets it apart from things like River God, because again, because it's for a different audience, because River God is aimed at adults. There's room for this sexual nature that was highly inappropriate and deeply worrying, given the age differences. There is no room for that in Eagle of the Ninth because it's a kid's book, so it's inherently different. And I think it's a fun story, and I think that there are some good themes there for kids. Obviously, you've got the whole friendship thing and loyalty, and but also the fact that people from different backgrounds can still be very close friends, and there's something to appreciate about differences in people. And as someone living in a country that is not the place of my birth and the place of my childhood, I really enjoyed the final comments about choosing where you settle and where you end up living out the rest of your life. I thought that was I personally appreciated it, and I felt like it's something that is not always given to kids as an option. Like you get to choose where you end up.
No, that's very true. I didn't even think about that initially, but no, now that you're saying it, like it is true. There's a very strong kind of like migration-y message in there. Um because it's true. Like I it still resonates for me in that way because I did grow up here, but I wasn't born here. And in any other circumstance, there would have been a super high chance that this would not have been where I grew up, right? I could have grown up in China. So um now, the difference is I didn't have a choice to come here or not. I was just sort of assigned to my parents and then I was brought here. But at the same time, I mean, life could have gone differently. I don't know. I could have suddenly been like, "Oh, no, I'm big into I want to be the country where I'm from." So I don't know. I could have like shaped my life around returning to China. I don't know if not that I necessarily would have, but maybe. So it's this idea of like possibility of like I did like the questions of identity that are brought up more in the book than the film, just because Katya's whole like I am Britain, but I am Roman. That actually resonated more than anything just because I was like, "Oh, so she was born here on the native land," and yeah. Yeah.
No, the identity conversations were, I think, very interesting, and I think appropriately pitched for the ages that Rosemary Sutcliff would have been writing for.
Yeah.
What do you think that the movie could have been improved by adding in any of the details that were left out, or do you think that the adaptation actually was a more successful piece of media?
I don't know, because the thing is it terribly bad if I'm like, but I like the movie the way it is. I mean,
No,
um,
I don't think it's bad, and I enjoyed the movie, and I think that some of the changes they made were actually a good creative direction.
you know what? Can I take a fun answer and just say, um, I would love to have actually had them include Cub just because I thought I would think I like animal companions, so I would think it's actually great and awesome. Um,
Cub would have been fun if they maybe found him on their journey.
I'm trying to think just like could they have made it
Yeah.
he where they found him, and like where would it have made sense? Also, just because the twists and turns in the film with the seal people, and then because you have to have this sort of flipped dynamic of slave and master. Like a wolf cub would have just made noise, and like the whole premise of like the back half of the film is running for your life, needing to be
Yeah.
sort of quiet and unseen. So I'm kind of just like, um,
It, I would have liked to have seen it because again I enjoy having animal companions in these things, but I think you're right. I think it would have been tricky to get in there without making it messier.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I I mean, I guess you could have done. No, because that wouldn't have worked. I don't know. Yeah, okay. Well, I would say you could cut out if they hadn't included the beheading scene, then it would have been totally like a kids movie, truly. But um, I mean that wasn't in the book. I mean, okay, maybe I would take out the beheading, but no, the pace of the movie moves just fine. The end is a little vague. So I don't know if I would have really wanted to spend time inserting something. No, you know what? I'm gonna just say I like the film mostly the way it is.
I do. I do. I do think that the beheading was actually unnecessary. I understand why they put it in there because it really does make the seal people this complete, like, it just doesn't make sense to Marcus, right? They didn't make sense before, but beheading the kid makes them even more of like the bad guys. So it does make it a lot more black and white. And I think that is something that the book did really well, was making the seal people just people. They're not these inhuman warriors who are going to go around and kill their children. They're people living their lives. They become friends with Marcus. They have like a good relationship with him. And he says a couple of times, like, if they can get the eagle, then okay, they're entitled to it. He doesn't have anything against them personally. And I think the movie, I do think the movie could have benefited a little bit from some more of that like gray line, that's not really a thing, is it? Like fuzzy line, shades of gray idea than it had. But I think the things that it left out were understandable. Obviously, the Katya thing, we've gone over the manumission of Aska and its different placement in that and his whole characterization. So, no, I think the movie took the source material and actually did a very good job adapting it for a modern adult audience.
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting to see kids' books adapted for screen because you always wonder like how much is going to be left as an actual thing for kids. But obviously if you don't want like the G rating, if you want like a PG or a PG-13 rating, then you're always like, okay, they're going to make interesting changes to bump it up.
Would you want to read it again?
I might. I have the film, so I just probably would watch that. But
Yeah.
it's not bad. Like I would recommend it and I would probably read it if something came up and I was like, okay, it's time to read it again. But again, I just didn't grow up with it. So it's not like something that I'm like, oh, and it's so cherished and I'll come back to it all the time.
I do think if you have children who are interested in history in the ancient world, this would probably not be a bad idea. It's a fun book. It's got some interesting bits about Britain before modern times, obviously it being an ancient book. So I think I would recommend it to people. I don't know that I'll read it again just because it's a kid's book and I'm not a kid. But I enjoyed it. It was good. Excellent. Well, we will wrap up here. Thank you all for joining us.
Yeah. And we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave us a review, and you can also follow us on social media at The Reading Party Podcast. If you'd like to leave us a book or movie suggestion, then email us at thereadingpartypod@gmail.com. See you next week.